Hej! Hur vårt samhälle ser ut imorgon, ja, det beror på hur vi agerar idag. Men vi har svårt att fundera så som människor över morgondagen, för vi kan inte riktigt greppa det. Så därför har vi bjudit in experten Finch för att berätta hur man gör om man vill blicka in i framtiden. Så välkommen till en 15 minuters crash course i hur just du blir framtidsspanare. And welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much, and thank you for letting me join you. I was trying to think what I could share about the future when we only have 15 minutes together. It's so difficult because I don't have a crystal ball that will magically tell me what's coming next, so I can't share that with you. And in fact, nobody has privileged access to events which haven't happened yet. We cannot gather data or evidence from the future because it has not yet arrived. And yet we face this problem that we try to forecast and predict. We try to gather information and create a model of what's coming and then place a bet on what is yet to happen. But the truth is, when we stare into this crystal ball, we're never going to get certainty about what is coming in the future. And yet this device can still be useful to us. And if we just have this little bit of time together, we can still look into the crystal ball and get something useful, because it's not really about the answers that the ball would give us so much as the questions that we choose to ask. So if I just have 15 minutes with you, the first thing I want you to do is to look at this crystal ball and think, if I could ask this any question that I wish, knowing I would get a certain response, that I would know the future for certain, what would you ask? Take a moment now, pause the video and think, how would you use that one question? Would you ask something with a yes or no answer? Would you ask something very open-ended? Would you ask about a specific issue that you can already identify today? Or would you have a broader, a more existential question about what lies ahead? Does your question have a time frame? Is it about next week, next month, 2, 5, 10 years down the line? What question would you ask this crystal ball? Pause here and reflect. Once you have that question, the other thing you can do, which will teach you something about your own attitude to the future, is think about the answers that you would expect from it. If the crystal ball was going to answer that question, what answer would you find favorable? What answer would you find challenging? What answers lie within your expectations and what answers are surprising? Even if we can't be told for sure what's lying next, we can create this kind of map of our own expectations, our hopes and fears and desires. And maybe once we know where those lie, we can get a clearer picture of what is really emerging around us right now in the present. Because when we think about the future, often it is actually to inform the decisions we must make today and the responsibilities we have in the here and now. Geoffrey Vickers, a famous British civil servant of the last century, said there were 3 fundamental questions to high-stakes decision-making. What's going on? What does it mean for us? And what can we do about it? And often we go straight to that last question. We think about the practicalities, we think about actions, we think about how to make the future we want, the future that we think would be best. But truly wise decision-making involves looking at all 3 of those questions, not paralyzing ourselves with analysis, but being honest that we need to understand what is going on. We need to understand what that means, and then understand our capacities in order to make a wise, a judicious decision. Now, given that these 3 questions are so difficult to answer in times of uncertainty, we do need to have a way forward. And what I can do, although I can't offer you a crystal ball, is suggest a way of mapping the future, which is used by the team at the Saïd Business School at Oxford University, where I'm a facilitator on the scenarios program. And one of the first steps in building future scenarios, the way we do it, is to create a map like this of what we call the transactional and contextual environments for a given entity, institution, or decision maker. So you can see here, there's a little orange bubble that represents an organization that wants to use the future to think about the situation it's in today. And that organization is on that black island, the transactional environment of all the entities and actors that it already interacts with. So if you're a business, you would have customers and suppliers, investors and partners. If you were a government agency, you might have other institutions, other parts of government, other parts of the community, non-profit organizations. But every actually existing actor that you interact with lives with you on that black island. And then beyond that island lies a wider blue sea of contextual uncertainties, factors that we perceive to be outside of our direct control. Could be geopolitics, commerce, macroeconomics, demographics, climate change, shifting social values. And what we can do is, by creating this map, is we can explore how contextual uncertainties could come ashore and change the island on which we have to make decisions. So, for example, imagine that you were a New York taxi driver, maybe 20 years ago, and that orange bubble was a New York cab driver. So you maybe rent your cab, you drive in the street and you interact with customers, they wave you down and you take them to places. You probably have a garage you go to and a gas station. There are other cab drivers that you interact with, sometimes competing, maybe collaborating, maybe forming a union. And you interact with the city government, the authority that licenses your taxi as well. So you pay for your cab license, called a medallion, for a certain period of time. And life seems pretty straightforward on your island. New Yorkers have taken taxis for quite a long time. The yellow cab is a pretty famous feature of that city. But outside, beyond that island, in the sea of uncertainty, things are changing. Technological factors, social factors, regulatory factors that affect your environment. So the smartphone arrives, and suddenly we have different ways of communicating through a portable device, which citizens are carrying in their pockets. There's deregulation of public transport. And then there's a change in social values as well. And people are now willing to let complete strangers ride with them in their automobiles for money. And suddenly the tech, the regulation, and the social changes come ashore on your island and redraw the map, because now you have ride-sharing services like Uber. And the world in which you thought you were making decisions has been transformed by those uncertainties beyond your direct control. So having given you that example and knowing we've had 7 of our 15 minutes together, I want to get you to take a pen and paper and do a little bit of this mapping for yourself. You might find it a worthy alternative to the humble crystal ball. What I'm going to ask you to do is to draw an island just like this in the center of your piece of paper, taking up about 50% of the page, and put yourself right there in the middle. So I'll let you pause for a moment and just do that now. It doesn't need to be a great artistic endeavor, just simple and representative. Then on the island, I want you to put everyone that you interact with, every actor, every entity, every institution. So that could be people from very close social, family, and personal circles. It could be national or local governments. It could be your employer, organizations that you're part of, unions, clubs, every single entity that you interact with. Capture as many as you can. And you might find this is a task that could really go for a long time. So maybe initially just give yourself 5 minutes and see what you capture. Even doing this can be a revelation. I did this work once in Norway, creating the island for a typical Norwegian head teacher of a school. It took 45 minutes to capture the relationships between students, teachers, different parts of government, the media, school nurses, unions, all the different elements that came into play. But even creating this map alone revealed just how many relationships were involved in going about your business, whether it's as a Norwegian school teacher or as whoever you are coming here as an attendee of the Push Summit. So assuming you've paused and taken that time to map the island of every entity that you interact with, we're now going to really properly think about that as an island, which is in a wider sea of uncertainties. And what I want you to do now is go around the edge of the island, and I want you to think, what forces drive the decisions of the other entities on that island? Not me, but the other actors. Those things like demographics, like climate change, some of them very large, but some of them might be more local and specific. What uncertainties beyond your own direct control drive the decisions of those other actors on the island? And it could be a force that affects just one actor on the island. It could be a force that affects 2 or 3, or it could be a force that affects all of them. But surround your island with the uncertainties that drive the decisions of those other actors, but are beyond your own direct control. And I would pause here and take another 5 or 10 minutes to capture as many of those as you can. Now, this diagram, this map, is the beginning of having the building blocks to manufacture different plausible futures which challenge our assumptions and expectations about the present. So which show us answers to those crystal ball questions which are not the ones that we can already see through our expectations, hopes, and fears. We get to see the world from a different angle, the perspective of a far future, and that helps us with those 3 questions which inform our decision making. Now, sadly, it's beyond anyone's capacity, I think, to create scenarios in 15 minutes, but luckily there are some that we made earlier. And I've been working for 3 years now on a project called Imagine, funded by the European Commission. And this project draws together researchers from 16 institutions in 13 European countries to look at the future of European regional inequality. And the spelling of this project is quite unusual, so it's quite easy to Google and find the Imagine scenarios if you want to look in greater depth. But what I want to just share now briefly is something of what we found when we mapped the future of Europe in this way. We put 4 future scenarios for the year 2048 onto 2 axes. The first axis was whether the overall goal of European society was economic prosperity, understood in a traditional sense like GDP, or some alternative measure of well-being, sustainability, and health. And this axis alone was challenging to some people because they thought you can't have well-being without prosperity. But what we've seen during the COVID crisis, for example, is governments having to make decisions that might jeopardize the economy but preserve citizens' health and well-being. And different governments have taken decisions according to different values and implemented them in different ways. They've made a judgment along this spectrum. And again, with the economic sanctions coming into play now because of the conflict in the Ukraine, there are decisions being made which might involve trade-offs around prosperity and well-being. The other axis which proved important to these scenarios was whether European society as a whole exhibited solidarity in policymaking or autonomy. Did Europe make decisions as a single bloc, or was it more fragmented, more of a patchwork? And positioning 4 scenarios along these axes proved to be something of a revelation. In the prosperity solidarity corner was a future called Silver Citadel, where much of decision-making was centrally managed by an AI-informed system, really focusing on making things fair in terms of traditional economic measures like GDP. So policymaking was about whispering in the ear of the central algorithm to try and influence it as it ran the numbers on what it perceived to be fair. But this was also a world which we saw back in 2019, where Ukraine and Belarus had become part of the European Union. And as a result, there was an ongoing conflict at Europe's new expanded eastern border. And when we originally presented those scenarios in 2019, it was already challenging to people's expectations. Why is there a war in these scenarios for the future of European regional inequality? That is not an answer we expected from our crystal ball, but it hints at how this kind of work can be useful. In the Green Guardian scenario, it was still about solidarity and decision-making as a bloc, but the focus was new measures of well-being. And this was a world where sustainability and surviving the climate crisis was the #1 priority of European society. And this meant a world where Europeans had totally rejected the lifestyle of the late 20th and early 21st century. There was still markets and trading, but no longer was capitalist consumerism the way of living for Europeans, and they looked back on our way of living with disdain. In Silicon Scaffold, prosperity is the overall goal, but autonomy means that actually Europe has fragmented into many jurisdictions dominated by different corporations and largely existing in virtual spaces. Social and economic life lives in the cloud, in corporate metaverses of different jurisdictions. And actually, our activities, our rights and responsibilities are entangled with those virtual spaces and their administration by for-profit entities. And in the final example, again, there is a high-level autonomy in policy making, which means that Europe exists as a kind of patchwork, but now different regions have different notions of what well-being is. And some areas are very progressive, others have taken alternative routes or even regressive routes, or traditional values. Parts of Europe, there may be 5 new genders. Parts of Europe may have the equivalent of human rights for virtual software agents. And then in other parts of Europe, values may come to seem really regressive. And the debates we've seen over vaccine and anti-vax, leave and remain in the British Brexit debate, all the different polarizations of our society have become so strong that from one region to another, fundamental beliefs themselves have been shaken. The point of this work is not to say we are more likely to go to one scenario or another, not to predict, not to try and model the future that hasn't arrived yet. These represent 4 vantage points, different ways that Europe could plausibly play out, and they represent different lenses to look through the situation that we now face in the present. What does our present look like seen in hindsight through the lens of Silver Citadel, Green Guardian, Silicon Scaffold, or Patchwork Rainbow? What can we see about the here and now from those perspectives that we can't see around us today? So with the map you created earlier, as you go through the Push Summit, as you hear people raising issues, debating or discussing, making proposals for how to make the world a better place, look at your map and say not just, what does this mean for me and my island as it exists today? But what does it also mean if those forces in the sea come ashore? If they redraw the map just as they did for New York taxi drivers 20 years ago? These proposals being suggested are hopeful, they create opportunities for the world to change, but we also need to think about what kind of future we're going to live in and what kind of answers the crystal ball might give us that we had not expected before. So that's my 15-minute trip to the future, and I hope that it helps you make wise decisions through this summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matt, for this. Do you think will you ask different questions to the crystal ball when you have access to these tools that you have taught us now? Does the tool change the questions that you ask?
Absolutely. I think it's a very iterative process because this is really always about learning. Of course, we're trying to make decisions, but as we go, we see things from different perspectives. And one of the things that happens with these scenarios, for example, is you could say, who is vulnerable? Who is ill-served in each of these futures? And then who are their precursors today? Are there people who are vulnerable in our society that we don't even detect yet, but we will see very clearly in 30 years' time? And I think that is part of the dance.
I think very common, at least for myself, when I think about the future, and if I place myself in the future, I have this idea that myself is going to be kind of unchanged. It's the same me, it's the future that's different, but I'm kind of like this time traveler placed into the future. But I guess that one thing that we kind of know is that values will change, and the people in the future will be changed because they have different values. Do you agree about this?
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And it's very sophisticated that we're creating this map of the future we might have to live in. But when we ourselves appear on that map, how will we be changed? When you think about where we get our identity from, we get it from experience, from inheritance, from the past. You know, who we are is always based on the precedent of who we've been. But you and I know, and all of us on this call know, that we've been different people from birth to whatever age we are today. And I think that notion of who might I become in these futures, and in what ways will I be my own strange ancestor? When we look back 5 or 10 years on the things that embarrassed us or delighted us or shocked us about who we were, how is the next version of ourselves from one of those imagined futures going to reflect on the person we are today in 2022 as a stranger?
Do we know anything about the future of values? Do we know, and do you know anything or have any ideas of what values that is changing now?
Well, I think this is one of the great challenges, actually, that, as I say, I'm not in the crystal ball business, but I think it's the biggest question, because even as you saw in the patchwork rainbow scenario, this fragmentation, even around notions like gender, when we look at how the notion of marriage and the notion of pleasure in a relationship changed from, say, the 1960s, because of gay rights, because of the feminist movement, the very nature of an institution as fundamental as marriage has transformed easily within living memory, and that work is not done yet. So of course there are debates that are very good to us now. You know, it's like talk of climate change, it's always in the newspapers. The trick, which I'm constantly working at, is how can you look out the corner of your eye and see the change that is not in the headlines, that is not on the front page, that is not a debate about vaccination or fake news or all the things that we're used to talking about. What is the thing that is creeping up on us, like the boiling frog that doesn't know it needs to jump out of the pan? And maybe just looking at our own individual maps and saying, where are those values starting to change? Where are people starting to make different decisions socially? That's the best I can offer.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much. It's been a complete honor.
Thank you so much. That was completely wonderful. So good.
I'm very grateful. No, thank you. It's so nice to have the opportunity, and you're all so nice to work with, that you make it very easy for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Could we ask you one small thing, just to record a kind of a trailer for this one, saying, "Hi, my name is Matt Finch, and in August, it's August, yeah, and in August, I will tell you how to look into the future," or something like that.
Yeah, let me. Yeah, hi, my name's Matt Finch. August at Push Summit. I'll be talking about how we can look into the future. Yeah. Hello there, my name's Matt Finch, and this August at Push Summit, I'll be talking with you about how we can usefully look into the future to make wiser decisions today. I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so much.
My complete pleasure.
And we'll be in touch about the pod thing, and also so you know when this is going live in August. And once again, Matt, thank you so much for your patience and for all your help with this. And if there's anything we can do to give you something back, and help you in some way, just reach out.
That's really kind. Good luck with everything, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.